to Live Life in the Spirit. I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scharrenberg.
We're so glad you're joining us today. And we wore pink, even though we're talking about the hard times, because we thought that would help cheer us up.
That's right.
It's not so much an easy or a comfortable one to talk about, but it's stuff that we all go through.
It is.
And maybe you're going through that right now.
Maybe. You know, hard times can really come in a lot of different packages too, when they can look different at different times in our life. Sometimes when we're young, it feels like everything we're faced with at that point in time is catastrophically
world-ending.
It really is. And then I don't want to minimize that, because when you're going through it, it sure feels like it is. And just to everything from growing up and making life decisions, and then getting married and having relationships and having children, that certainly adds a whole different level of hard times or difficulty or valleys sometimes, and some different mountaintop experiences as well. And then you add in medical issues and accidents and difficulty that way. Work can...
Well, and for some, it can be college.
Oh, gosh.
Struggling in school in that aspect, or work, or being single because they haven't been able to find the right guy.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they're widowed or widower.
Mm-hmm.
They've just lost a spouse. And life is very difficult right now.
Absolutely.
And we're coming up on the holidays, and so that makes it even tougher, because we know that this stretch is always bad anyway for depression, seasonal depression. And then if you add in the loss or any kind of trauma, then the last thing you want is to join in the celebrations of the holidays because you're facing such hard times and such miserable times.
Sure.
We get it.
Oh, absolutely. Been there in many of those situations.
But we don't want this to be a downer. That's why you're joining us in today. That's why you're joining in today, because hopefully we can offer maybe a few tools, hopefully some inspiration, because what sets us apart
as Christians
in Christian living, as opposed to the rest of the world, who is also facing these hard times, but has no hope and sees no end and has no one to turn to. You know, I always love the part where people say, well, I don't have to go to church to be a Christian. No, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. That's not what I wanted to say. I love how people have always said to me, you know, I don't have to go to church to believe in God. And that's true. You don't have to go to church to believe in God. But the reason why God gives us the church is for this very thing, those hard times, where not only do you have that other person or that group of people, the body of Christ, to come along to lean on, to help lift you up, to help bolster you, to help encourage you, to give you a shoulder to cry on, but also to give you good, hopefully sound advice.
Oh, absolutely.
Where if you don't have that, and you're looking to the secular world for that, you could be taking some really poor counsel, especially when you're the most vulnerable.
Unfortunately, when we are at our most vulnerable, that's when people can seek out to prey on that vulnerability. And then we can end up in an even worse situation.
Or even well-meaning people, just they feel helpless, and so they just want to give advice, and it's not always the best advice.
It's true.
And I will admit that sometimes I've even been guilty of that, even in good intentions. And it is hard to know. And that's why prayer is at the top of the list. If you are helping someone going through a hard time, just praying that not only God will give you the words to say, but that He'll give you the words not to say.
Yes. Dear Lord, give me the words to stay and shut me up when I'm not supposed to go there.
Sometimes just being that support is the big thing. But I know now I'm getting onto the helping side, because that's what I do a lot of. You know what? I'm human, and I've gone through a fair share of my hard times as well. You know,
I've gotten to where there's a couple of scriptures I turn to so often when things are difficult, especially when maybe I just don't know where else to turn to, or I just need something. Sometimes I just think we need something to hold on to. And this verse has always been significant to me. And then when I was going through some really, really difficult times a few months ago, God put this verse on my heart at the time when he lifted that burden from me. And so since then it has really, I love this verse. And it's from the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. It says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I just love that, because Jesus is telling us, when you are in those times when you feel like you can't carry it, he will take it from you if only you ask him and let him, which is sometimes the harder part of it, because it means we have to let go of control of the situation. We have to let go of our hopes and our desires for that situation, because if we are truly going to let go of it, we have to give it to God. And sometimes that's hard to do, but I think oftentimes in the past where I've really struggled, it's when I wasn't doing that, because then we are trying to carry this burden on our own, and it's hard to do. We aren't meant to carry it alone.
No. And that's why Christ became flesh, and why he came, to show us that he does understand.
And the other thing is, sometimes the tough things that we go through are short-lived, or maybe it's difficult for a little while and then it clears up. And then sometimes there's long suffering. And I think that our mindset and how we get through long suffering, that looks very different than the things that have an end in sight. Like, we've all been there where, like, okay, I just have to get through one more hour or one more day or one more week or whatever that looks like, and then this will end. And then when you have the times, though, where
and
there is not an end down there, and that light at the end of the tunnel, I think that's another oncoming train. When you just know that this particular situation isn't changing for a while. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And that's the reminder that here on earth, things are going to be difficult sometimes, but this is not our permanent home. This is temporary. And our ultimate hope comes in the fact that we do the best we can here. And we do as much as we can for God's kingdom here. And then we get to spend eternity in glory. And that right there makes everything we have to go through here pale.
Paul says, I know these present troubles are nothing because of my glory that waits for me, the reward in heaven. So he can endure whatever, knowing that this is all temporary, as much as it may suck at the time.
Absolutely.
But yes, you did. You touched on the fact of those that are in long-suffering situations, because you do. You can get your second wind. You can bolster yourself up, when you're in those times. I'm thinking of people who are like caregivers for loved ones that have Alzheimer's, dementia, muscular dystrophy, MS, lupus, these horrible, there's so many diseases that are as bad or worse than that. But that just does not have, and there is not an end in sight. And the end that is not
a
good either.
Right.
So you can bolster yourself up for those times, and act like, I can do this, and then you just kind of hit that wall, and then you're like, I can't do this, I can't keep doing this. And when we look to ourselves and our own strength, we can't.
No. And I think you touched on something important that I'd like to circle back to when you talked about people saying, why I don't need to go to church to believe in God, and the importance of that. And it even says scripturally that we are not meant to be in this world alone. God created us in community. He created us to be in relationship with each other. And part of that is so that we can bolster each other up during those times. I can't imagine going through what I've been through without my church families at different points in times. I mean, the church family that I grew up with is incredible. And I remember, I went away to college. I lived from the Alaska all the way down to Florida as far as states goes, and that's a long ways from Nebraska. And I always knew, no matter what, I could call that church home, and they would pray, and they would lift me up, even if we were far away. And, you know, there were times when, you know, I was part of different churches, and, you know, people would bring over a meal when they knew things were difficult. And those small gestures mean so much. Or stop by with a card, or offer to go out for coffee, or just do different things to provide that connection that we so often need when we are going through difficult times.
You know, I guess I'm going to throw out my daughter here, but one of my daughters was going through a really, really hard time. And it was multiple things. It was not, if it had just been one thing, that would have been bad enough. But it was multiple things all lumped on at one time. And it had just finally gotten to be too much. And you know, that was so precious to see that, you know, she came to church even though she didn't feel like it, but she knew she needed it. Mm-hmm. And to watch the church family come around her at that time, she was still just even, like, amazed is not the right word, but she was so humbled at the age range of those that came alongside of her. It wasn't just the ones that were her age, but it was people all the way up into their 70s and 80s, and, you know, everybody coming, the whole span, and just being that support and letting her know that they understood. And, you know, oh, not that I've been there, I've had worse, you know, it wasn't that. It was, we're here with you during this moment, and we're going to help get you through it. Yeah. And that meant so much. Even more than the flowers, even more than the card, just the presence.
And I think sometimes we can underestimate the value of presence. It just someone sitting there in silence sometimes can mean more than the other person might ever know.
Yeah, I remember when I had both of my knees done. So my youngest was in preschool still. She was 4. And it's just those little things, you know. My husband was working, the other kids were in school. I couldn't drive. I couldn't do anything. I had both of them done at the same time. And I remember it was those little things. What am I going to do? I cannot even get her to preschool because it was a private one at that time. They didn't have a school one with a bus. And my church family stepped up, and they each took turns taking her in, and then somebody different would bring her home. And that meant so much. And it did so much more than just help me out, because she was very quiet and did not want to associate with people too much. She was 4, but just she wasn't that personality. And you know, by those people stepping up and picking her up and taking her, she just opened up and blossomed and chattered with them all, and they just loved it. Yeah. So, you know, it's those things. And yes, the meals are great and the cards are great, but you know, when you are really in a fix, when you are really in a bind, having people step up and fill in that gap is, and depending on your personality and the hard times that hit you, we all have coping mechanisms. Some of them are healthy and some of them are not healthy, which then can contribute to more problems and make things a whole lot harder. So, coming from your background, what would you give words of wisdom to on that?
Well, professionally, certainly I have seen my fair share of unhealthy coping mechanisms, and everybody's fairly familiar with a lot of those. Addictions are often an unhealthy coping mechanism, and they can be centering around something that goes with a lot of healthy and unhealthy ones, which is avoidance. So if we want to avoid how we're feeling, or avoid what's going on, or how we might need to, what we need to deal with, then it could be anything. It could become video games, it could be binge watching TV, it could be eating, it could be, like I said, you know, any other addiction. Smoking, drinking,
Spending.
drugs. Oh, lots of people shop.
Oh, retail therapy, I heard that.
Yes. Not a licensed clinical therapy option. Insurance isn't covering that, just so you know.
Not to mention the additional hard things that lead to after that. Or on the other side, using those things as justification. So I'm thinking of, since I've had a really, really hard time, or I'm really stressed out, or this is really bad, then I deserve that Coke or that Pepsi, or I deserve that candy bar, or you know what, I'm gonna go out to Dairy Queen because I deserve that right now, or maybe I don't deserve it, but it's a justification of, because I'm feeling this way, I'm gonna allow myself this, which once in a while is okay, but it can become
a really
bad pattern.
And if it's always, and I will say, if it's about food, then it can become a really unhealthy relationship between emotions and food and difficult times, and then it can become a really unhealthy coping skill. And even comedy, humor, is another one that we might be a little familiar with. And there's nothing wrong with it, as long as it isn't used to always avoid.
True. Well, there's one thing about having that humor to lighten things, because that is good therapy.
Oh, absolutely.
And it helps you kind of keep things in perspective, and it just, if it's going to be crappy anyway, you know, if it's going to be hard and it's not going to get any better, I'd rather laugh through it than, I mean, you're not going to laugh all the time. No. But yes, if you're using it, or snarky, or lewd comments or something like that. Just,
oh, sure.
That's not humor.
And I was thinking more, I've seen people, you know, they say that the people who laugh the most are the saddest or whatever, the ones that cover up how they're feeling by just constantly.
So many of the people with mental illness and suicidal are comedians.
Oh, 100%.
And a lot of the comedians, of course, are eating out and on the road and stuff. But a lot of them are extremely heavy and always have been, and they've used humor as a way to deflect that and hide it or whatever.
Make it okay. Yeah. You know, from a personal standpoint, you know, I've had different times where I've had healthier coping mechanisms than other. I can't say I've ever been one who misused humor so much. I'm one like you that if life is going to be difficult, I'm going to find some ways to laugh through it. Because if not, you just probably would cry, and you don't want to do that all the time. So, and I feel like I've been fortunate enough that feeling my feelings, for the most part, has been something that I've been taught to do growing up. It wasn't like, oh, you're not allowed to be sad, or you're not allowed to feel grief, or feel, you know, that kind of thing. So I appreciate the fact that I have been, I guess, grown up allowing to experience all those. I will say I've had different times in my adult life where I shoved that kind of stuff down, and that's unhealthy, and it was incredibly unhealthy. And it was during a time where overall I was just unhealthy because I was miserable, and I was not feeling or addressing any of the things that were going on, and like physically, emotionally, none of that stuff, nothing was good. And so it can become something where it kind of takes over.
Well, and then those bad habits stick with you. As much as you try to overcome them, as much as you have risen above them, you know, something comes along and then bam, it just wants to suck you right back down again, doesn't it?
It does. And I can say that I know exactly what you're talking about. You know, I'm in such a better place now, just with my mental health and in my life overall. The emotional and spiritual healing that I've gone through, and then just the physical changes that I've been making, and just focusing on my health. And then I've got a lot going on right now. This is a difficult journey at this point in time. There's some things happening. And even though I'm not, like, I don't feel depressed, and I don't feel that, like, draw to just pull the covers over my head and not feel like dealing with the world, but my go-to during times when it was really difficult was to turn to food or to avoid. And so I would binge watch a TV show, or I would find something to immerse myself into that would allow me to not think about or feel what's going on. And so it's been interesting over the last week or so. I've seen like a resurgence of the idea that those are the things that I should do. Like, well, this is a really difficult time, so I should just forget everything that's going on and just focus on this TV show or do this or do that. And I was surprised to figure out that those thoughts were still happening, and I was struggling because habitually when things have been difficult, that's what I always did. And so now it's a matter of trying to break those habits and patterns, even though I don't have like this, I can't explain it, but before it was like an internal draw. I mean, there was like you have to avoid this. You cannot face what's going on. And now it's like, no, I can. Like, I know it's going to be fine. I'm not excited about facing it, but I know it's going to be fine. But like, boy, the ease at which it was to fall back into some of that was very surprising to me.
So when you say the words, I know it's going to be fine. Where does that come from? Because there are probably listeners out there now that like, I don't know, this is going to be fine. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be terrible. You have those people that are the glass half full, the glass half empty, and those are like, I don't even have a glass. Just got to hold it in my hand and it's just running through.
I have no bird. I have no bush.
God has taken my bird and my bush.
Yes.
If you know Bruce Almighty. Yeah. Sometimes it can feel like that. And that becomes the problem then. When we have no hope to draw from, there's probably people going, how can you say that you know it'll be all right?
Well, and I will say that I use that phrase very carefully. I can say that to myself about myself. But like if my kids, if I'm talking to them, at this point in time, I would phrase it differently, because for me, I know what I mean when I say it's going to be all right. I mean that I know that God has a situation, that he already knows what's happening, and that he knows how it's going to turn out. And ultimately, like we said, God has overcome this world. And so I will be okay because no matter what, I know where I'm going. But that doesn't mean that I'm confident that everything
or that you want to go through this, or that
right.
you have to walk through this valley.
Right. I mean, whatever it looks like, I know I'm not doing it alone. God is with me every step of the way, and he's put an amazing support system around me, and I'm grateful for all of that. But you're right in that everything is going to be okay. That's not a phrase I think we should sprinkle in, because it can be misconstrued, and it can make people feel like you're downplaying what they're going through.
And that's those cliche things,
Mm-hmm.
and unfortunately a lot of people, Christian or not, when somebody is really hurting and they're going through a hard time, I think this goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
There are some that just flippantly say things
Mm-hmm.
to try to make it better, and it
Right.
doesn't. But then I don't think that's fair when somebody literally is trying to help and trying not to say memes or just throw scripture at, but if the person is not willing to receive it, well then that's on them.
It is.
Too. I mean, so it's touchy, there's no definitive line.
Mm-hmm.
It is so gray when you get into those areas. But like you said, sometimes just sitting there and being quiet, whether it's in person or sometimes it's just on the phone, just
Mm-hmm.
having that connection. And you remember all the AT&T phone commercials that used to leave you crying all the time.
Uh-huh.
What was the main theme about that? It was connecting
Connection.
People.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that for the majority of my adult life, I have faced the difficult times with the additional challenge of having a mental health diagnosis along with it that at times was more well managed than others. So what does it look like facing difficult times? Like how do you face that? What do you do during those times?
So maybe I can talk to those of you out there who are like going, well, that's all great and everything, but that doesn't speak to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of where I'm
Mm-hmm.
at. And I was fortunate enough, for the most part, that my family didn't have a problem showing emotion. However, extended family, and it was a generation that you don't let them see you crying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually, not that it was drilled in, but that's just kind of the way I grew up. That, no matter how bad it was, nobody was going to see me cry.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard to kind of get over that and allow myself to have releases of that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm more the person who'd rather go beat on something than just sit down and have a good cry.
Right.
Know? So what do I do in those hard times? You know, I hate to say, I wouldn't say that I'm an avoidance, but more a deflect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's still going to be there. And it's not probably going to get better until it gets better, if it's going to. So it's either that I can either laugh, or I can cry, or I can get my mind on something else. People who ruminate, and I have been there too. There have been some things that, for some reason, it is a trigger and you cannot get it out of your head. You just ruminate over and over an hour, or for hours, days, to the point where you can't sleep. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter how much praying you do, it seems like it doesn't leave. And but thankfully, those have been smaller instances. Mm-hmm. I would say, for the most part, when I say I just give it to God, I don't say that flippantly by any means. Mm-hmm. It's that because I know that life is so short, and I have two choices. I can either take that time that I have and I can completely focus on that and obsess on it and let it become my whole world for all this time, and then I missed out. It's still going to be there. Me being anxious and worrying and fretting isn't going to solve anything or make anything happen or make it go faster or add one more hair to my head. Jesus said that. Mm-hmm. So I have learned, when I say this again, I'm not saying this lightly, but I have learned that the greatest gift that God can give to me is that passage you read from Matthew. His yoke is easy, his burden is light, and I just give it to him knowing that I have no control over this. And maybe that's really where it comes right down to. It is a control issue more than anything. There are so many things in our lives we have no control over. When we try to grab control over something that we possibly can't, it just makes 10 times more problems.
Mm-hmm. Because then we often end up trying to control things that we can control.
Or people.
Mm-hmm. Because of all of the things we feel like are out of our control. And then that can be pretty ugly.
It can. And maybe that's how some people cope too. Mm-hmm. Is finding. So when you think about those bad habits, mm-hmm. I think of people with eating disorders or different things like that. It's like, well, since I can't control this, that is one thing I can control, mm-hmm. and it's not done in a healthy way.
Right.
So I guess that's just what I do, and laughter, and Lord knows that, yes, I have gone through plenty of hard things in my life. And
you have unfortunately been blessed with the gift of long suffering in many ways. We've talked about that. It does not always feel like a gift, I know.
No.
But I think you have a grace because you've walked through things like that I'm sad that you have, but it's also a beautiful thing.
Well, and it's given me the opportunity, and I will say the gift to work on those areas. Mm-hmm. Not that there still aren't other really hard days during those times, but in the same grand scheme of things, I look at even what I have gone through and what I am going through, the hard things that happen. I can still look at that and appreciate the spot where I'm at, mm-hmm. and I can look at so many people around that have it so much worse, right? So much worse, and just be grateful that I have a God and people that He's put in my life to help me walk through that. And for some people who feel like they're completely all alone and that they have no one, a lot of times that's by choice, not always, but a lot of times it's because they just won't let people in.
Right. And I think, that's an important part of this process. Not only, I think it's twofold. When people are struggling to let go of something or to give it to God, or who say they're praying for peace and praying for peace and praying for peace and they're just not getting it. Or my guess is there's a part of it that you're not letting go of.
I was going to say, you just don't want that peace.
Right.
Some of us live in so much drama that's what feeds. I mean, I've seen this happen with so many. Mm-hmm. that they're just not happy unless they have something to complain about, or they have drama in their life. And once that drama's gone, by God, they're going to seek something out so that way they keep having it.
Right.
And for those who say, I have no peace, I have no rest, I have no what, it's because they don't want it. If God was literally giving them peace, they wouldn't accept it.
Right.
And it can be for multiple reasons.
Oh,
it could be one, because maybe they don't feel they deserve it, or two, well, then they wouldn't have anything to complain about, or three, there's just so many multiple reasons why they don't accept the gifts that God has given us. He says, ask and you shall receive, knock, seek. It's there when we are asking the right things. It doesn't mean ask for God for a Porsche tomorrow and it'll be on your front doorstep. That's not what he's getting at. It was anything that furthers the kingdom of God. Definite peace and rest and deeper spiritual, that is all things that are in the kingdom of God. And God does hear us.
Oh, for sure.
He sees us. The difference is, are we willing to let him in and accept that which he is offering?
And I know, I've had different times in my life where there were things that I was struggling to let go of. And I heard a sermon once and it reminds me of this. So to quickly summarize, the whole concept was that everybody has a bunch of suitcases, okay? And those are the burdens that we carry. And okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to pray tonight and I'm going to give this all to God. And then in the morning, there's this one that I'm like, I didn't mean to give this one to you. And I'm going to pick that one back up and I'm going to carry it with me. And then tonight, I'm going to sit down and God, I'm just going to give it all to you. But this one here, and whatever that one thing is, if we aren't willing to surrender fully to God and let go and recognize we don't have control over it anyways. It is an illusion in our head that we are creating, that we have control over it. But by doing that, we are keeping ourselves from accepting that peace and from really and truly living fully in all that God has for us, because we're holding on. And the sermon, like, they had a bunch of luggage and it was very visual, which is why I remember it. It was kind of a cool sermon, but
I've actually didn't like that.
That's what you told me. That was cool. I didn't see it from you.
It was a little different angle, but yeah.
But just this idea that you can't find peace if you continue
to keep
grabbing it back. Yeah.
And say, here, Jesus, take my yoke. Nah, I'll take it back. And a lot of that, I think, is, one, sometimes it's because we don't feel that we're worthy to not be in that pain anymore. Sometimes it's because we have carried it for so long, those grooves are so deep in our shoulders that we feel naked and bare without it. Sometimes it's because the full weight of God's grace by taking it from us is too much to bear. So The Chosen, and it came out in season 4. There's a spot in there, and let's see, that would have been, episode 5 or 6. There's a spot where Jesus is walking, I think it's when they were going to go to Lazarus or whatever. They're walking down the road with the disciples, and they come across these Roman soldiers. Now, this is not scriptural, but this is cultural. This was what did happen. The Roman soldier could force a Jew to carry his armor or his helmet or whatever he wanted to for 1 mile.
That's right.
But they couldn't go more than a mile. And I love how Dallas Jenkins frames this. Because as Jesus is going, now again, he is the Son of God, and he has the disciples around him, and these Roman soldiers stop him, and they're harassing them and bantering with them, and they force them to have to take their armor and their helmet, and they come over and they jam the helmet on Jesus' head. Now you can see the other disciples going, oh my gosh, no, let me take that. And Jesus says, no, I will carry this burden, which is going to be nothing compared to the burden he's about to carry.
Right.
But all these disciples are carrying this stuff, and they're grumbling and they're complaining and everything. Now you were talking about an end in sight. They knew that the law said that they only had to go a mile. And of course the Romans are, you know, still chiding them this whole way. They get to the end of the mile, and the Roman soldier says, okay, now you're done, your time is up. You fulfilled by law, we can't make you go anymore. And Jesus keeps walking. And they stop him, and they said, no, wait a minute, no, we can't force you to go anymore. And he says, I know you can't force me, but if I volunteer to go the other mile to the outpost,
you're not
in trouble, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they just looked at him, and he keeps walking, and so the rest of the disciples pick up the stuff, and they start carrying it. If someone asks you to go a mile, go two. But here's the thing, as they get going, now they're on their own mission, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes all the fun out of it for the Roman soldiers, and they start feeling guilty, and they come up and they go, well, here, that probably wouldn't look too good if you're wearing my helmet as we're coming into the, into the barracks and stuff. It was just funny to see the change. What seemed like fun and you know, I've got it over you, I'm lording it over you. Once all of a sudden the constraints were off, and now I'm doing this for you. It wasn't so much fun and games anymore, and they felt horrible. They didn't know how to feel. I mean,
they were very taken aback by the whole thing, and probably changed in many of them.
And I see that with so many people like that. Because we want to give to God this burden, this hard thing that we have that's so bad. But when he actually does take it, a free mission,
we don't know what to do with it.
Right, and we want to take it, well, no, here, you shouldn't be taking that. You know, I can wear this piece, or I can take this piece, or, you know, that's going to be too heavy for you. At least let me take some of it back. And I think that's a good analogy.
Oh, most definitely.
It was a very short snippet in there, but it was so impactful, I thought, if people were really watching and paying attention.
You know, and I think for me, the other piece of it that I can think of sometimes where I struggled, it was because my faith was strong enough to know that I didn't know that God would handle the situation the way I wanted him to. I didn't know, not that it would have changed anything if I hadn't let it go, but to fully surrender that situation to him meant that I was surrendering the outcome to him as well.
And that is huge.
And that was really hard.
So it's not just even so much control, it is the future. Yes, I want you to take it, which means that everything's going to turn out okay. This test is going to come back negative. That surgery is going to be successful. This court case is going to go exactly how I want it to go. This, you know, all these things that we...
And that's, you know, that's one thing I've really worked on with my boys, teaching them how to pray. And my oldest in particular just asks so many questions about that. And he wants to do it right, you know, and I love that hunger in him. That's amazing. But that's one of the things we've talked a lot about is we can't, God knows our hearts. And he wants us to tell him, God, I really want this to go this way. But what I need to pray is that whatever way it goes, you will help me to accept it. You will help me to have the strength that I need to get through it, or the grace, or the attitude, whatever that looks like, you know. We've talked about, you know, you can't pray for a Porsche, you know, and because he's talked about, well, if I wanted to pray for like my future wife, he's a deep thinker. He thinks about the future way more than anyone his age should. And I'm like, well, don't pray for someone specific, especially right now. Like, don't pray that he'll make the girl you have a crush on in science class be your wife. But pray that
for those attributes.
Pray for the attributes, and pray that he will make her into the woman that will be the wife that you need. And then pray that he will continue to make you into the man that you need to be the right husband for her. And so he's like, okay, that's what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And like he's really, but to let go of, well, I really like the girl inside. You know what I mean? Like, we all have been there, but we can't pray for specific things and then feel like it's a lack of faith if it doesn't go that way. And I think that's where so often people can get lost or can get discouraged or disillusioned. Well, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed that everything was going to be fine, and it wasn't. So what's wrong with me? We've talked about that scripture not long ago. Was it the sin of the
father,
or the
sin
son?
of the son, or sin of the father, the blind man? And Jesus says,
Neither.
So we have kind of broadly talked about those times of hard, but let's get downright specific. One of the reasons why we thought this would be a good thing to talk about, and at this time, and from a Christian's perspective, is because you're dealing immediately with something that you don't know the outcome of, and don't even really have an inkling one way or the other.
Right. So there's a significant family history of cancer, breast cancer in particular. And so that's something that my doctor and I have stayed pretty on top of.
And very extensive.
Very extensively. So not only do I have a mammogram every 6 months, every year, but then we were doing them at 6 months to watch some different things. We do an MRI annually just because the mammogram doesn't always give us the clear picture. So for the last 5 years, almost every 6 months, I've had some form of mammogram, ultrasound, or MRI. And my initial one, I had to have a biopsy and everything turned out fine on that. And then we've just had things we've watched, and then went in this 2 weeks ago for my annual mammogram and MRI, and the mammogram was fine, but the MRI was not. There had been changes, and something doesn't look right compared to what it was last year and the year before. And so I did an ultrasound, which just confirmed that there is something there, and it doesn't look, they can't just determine from imaging what it is. And so on Friday, I will be going in for another biopsy on that area to determine whether or not this is a benign mass of some sort or a form of cancer. And so when I talked about going through difficult times right now and being surprised that some of those old habits were popping up, it's because I do better when I know what it is I'm facing, because then you can have a plan and you can know the things you need to do. In this limbo period just sucks, for lack of a better way of saying it. But I will say, and that's why, my boys know a little bit about what's going on, enough because I've had to go back in 2 or 3 different times, and going back in on Friday, and it's always when they've been at school, but there was a couple times I wasn't sure if I'd make it home on time, and if I'm not home, they always want to know. And so, and I'm working on teaching them how to walk through these times as Christians, like what we do, and how to have faith and how to pray during these times. And it's okay to be scared, but also be confident in the Lord. But one of the things, my youngest was having a day the other day where he was just, I could tell something was bothering him, and I had a suspicion of what it was. And I said, okay, bud, so here's your window to tell me what's going on, because we're not going to have a whole nother day like this tomorrow when he's worried about something and he doesn't want to talk about it. He's just kind of a jerk, to be honest with you, he just is. And we just know this. And then I'm grateful that we've come a long way enough that I can say, okay, something's going on. And he's like, well, I don't know. And I said, and I asked a couple of different things. And no, that wasn't it. And I said, well, are you worried about this test? Well, maybe, and my mom heart wanted to tell him, oh, sweetheart, everything's going to be okay. But I won't lie to my kids. Not that I don't think everything will be okay, but again, I know that his idea of everything is going to be okay, and mine are not the same. And so we prayed together in that moment. In that moment, we said a quick prayer sitting in the car in the driveway, and then he asked if we could pray at night before he went to bed, because that seems to be when things really ramp up, is at night, which I get that, because then it's quiet and you have time to think. So then we said an extra prayer that night before bed, and he's been better. I have a feeling that probably we'll do that again, if not today, tomorrow. But he's learning how to trust in that. But again, being careful, because while I firmly believe God is holding me throughout this, it's going to be okay in that none of it's a surprise to God, and he already has all of it worked out, whatever that looks like. It's a possibility. And so just until we know, then I'm in this window of, okay, God, I'm trusting and I'm hoping, and I certainly pray. I don't want it to be cancer. I'd rather not have to deal with that. If I do, then okay, we'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But just having the faith to know that God's got this no matter what that looks like. And he's got me no matter what that looks like.
Well, and he's given you support and you're willing to accept it.
Oh, 100%. And I am incredibly grateful to have the support that I have in friends and in family, and just knowing that I don't have to walk this alone is huge.
Well, I wanted to kind of leave you with some words from King David, because he was very emotional. He had no problem laying it out all on the table and telling God exactly what he felt like. And he says in Psalms 13, "How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death." Sometimes that kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? we go to God for help, but we spend the whole time telling him how he's not helping and how things are not getting better and how everything's going to go wrong and nobody likes me, everybody hates me, I'm going to eat some worms and die. But even then he says, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." I love those words, because everything was going wrong in David's life at that time. Mm-hmm. And yet he still trusted not just in God, but his steadfast love, which means unwavering, always there, always unconditional. And then he says, "I will sing to the Lord." So he's singing even in the depths of despair and crying out and in the drama of his life, because he has dealt bountifully with me. It doesn't mean that, I just know God's there. Yeah, he's provided for me once or twice. Mm-hmm. It's because God's showers of blessings have bestowed on him. Mm-hmm. Those are the words of hope and encouragement. It's those same words that we can pray to God and the same reactions that we're going to get from him. Mm-hmm. We know that God's steadfast love is for each and every one of us. It's unwavering. And we know that his blessings come bountifully, and especially if we ask.
If we ask.
And if we seek.
And David is such an amazing one to read if you're going through that, because he is so very human.
He is, and he you talk about hard times. He knows way more than his fair share of hard times. And yet, where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. And that's what we want to leave with you today. And if you are one of those people who says, well, I believe God, but I don't need to go to church. Because if you are one of those people, we want you to think about that again. Because there's nothing like having friends and family and church family, the body of Christ, surrounding you when those times are difficult, when you are in those hard times, lifting you up. Mm-hmm. And carrying you.
And be in the hands and feet of Christ in this world.
So as we said, we will not leave you with any cliches, but we know that God's got this.
He does.
And none of this was a surprise. And we will walk through it, and we will give you an update when we know something.
Yes, we will. Until next time.
Shalom.